At this point, nothing hurts the way it used to. There's no urgency pulling you forward, no crisis demanding action. And still, pressure remains. Not emotional pressure, temporal pressure. The sense that this phase is taking too long, that something should already be different. Not because it's painful, but because time has passed. The discomfort doesn't come from what you feel. It comes from how long you've been feeling it. The thought appears quietly. This is taking longer than expected. Not as panic, not as fear, just as observation, a neutral seeming calculation. How long have I been here? How long has it been quiet? How long without direction? The mind starts counting, even when nothing is asking to be measured. Time becomes the reference, because there is no other signal. And without realizing it, duration turns into judgment. You didn't invent this pressure. You inherited it. Everything else in life responds to timelines. Work has deadlines. Projects have schedules. Recovery has phases. Progress has markers. So when something doesn't move on time, it feels wrong, like a delay, like inefficiency, like being behind. But this phase was never designed to respond to productivity logic. It doesn't accelerate because you notice the time. It doesn't conclude because enough days have passed. This is the mistake that creates tension, treating an internal reorganization as if it were a task, something with a start date, a midpoint, an expected end. How long is this supposed to last? When should I be done with this? What's the normal timeline? But there is no normal here. No average. No expected duration. This phase doesn't respond to timelines. It responds to something else. Something quieter. Something you can't rush. When there's no deadline, the mind gets restless. Not because it wants to move, but because it doesn't know how to wait without structure. Time without markers feels uncontained, unsupervised. So the mind creates its own pressure. If this doesn't end soon, if I'm still here next month, if nothing changes by then, none of these thoughts come from reality. They come from discomfort with not knowing when. This is where comparison sneaks in. Not comparison of outcomes, comparison of timing. Other people seem to move faster, transition quicker, settle sooner. So the question isn't, what am I doing wrong? It's, why is this taking me longer? But longer than what? Longer than who? Longer than a timeline that never applied here. Nothing is late. Nothing is behind. This just isn't on a clock. The body doesn't count days. It doesn't track milestones. It doesn't know months. It responds to readiness, to integration, to internal alignment. The mind, on the other hand, lives on calendars. It wants dates, markers, confirmation that time is being used correctly. So when the body slows, and the mind keeps counting, tension appears, not because something is wrong, but because they're operating on different systems. A calendar measures movement. This phase isn't about movement, it's about reorganization. Calendars work when something advances. They don't work when something is settling, stabilizing, finding its own internal timing. This is why every attempt to put a deadline on this phase fails. Because nothing is asking you to arrive. Nothing is requesting completion. Nothing is late. The most exhausting question isn't what now. It's how much longer. Because it implies an end point that hasn't been defined. Every time you ask it, you reintroduce pressure. You turn time into something to beat, something to escape, something to endure. But this phase isn't taking too long. It just isn't timed. It isn't scheduled. It isn't measured in duration. There's a subtle shift when the clock loosens. Not relief, not peace, just less friction. The question how long loses intensity. Because time stops being evidence that something is wrong. This phase doesn't respond to timelines. There is no deadline here. Nothing is asking you to arrive. It isn't late. It's unscheduled. You're not waiting for something to start. You're not failing to finish something. You're in a space where time doesn't apply the way it usually does. No milestones. No schedule, no countdown. Just internal movement without a calendar. This phase doesn't respond to timelines. It never did. Nothing is late. Nothing is behind. Nothing is overdue. This just isn't on a clock.